Hello everyone, welcome to Fuse Room. I'm Alberto as usual, and in this video we are going to talk about producing a band. It's gonna be a super cool video. I don't want to do edits, I don't want to do anything. I want you to feel as if you were here in the room and we will talk about something that is incredibly important in comparison to mixing or mastering and all of the other phases that are obviously great, but they are based on the fact that the production has done something, that the band has talked with producers, and that the record is kind of out there, it's been recorded. And even to record it, we need to have ideas, in the clear for where we want the artist or band to go. So I've taken a perfect example, I think, of something that I've worked with in 2009. And this is actually a song that we used in September 2021. So this is like last month for my Patron mix. So I run a Patreon, and the patrons in my Patreon, obviously, they can run a mix every month of something that I've produced, or that I have clearance from the artist or the production team to mix together. It's not a mixing contest, but everybody has ideas, and then we compare what people did and how things went, what was cool about a mix and what wasn't, what was cool about another mix, and so on and so forth. But this song actually takes me back to one of the most probably interesting phases of being a producer, because in this example, which is actually the mix we used for that month, I was producing a high school band, and there's some very cool ideas that I think are gonna be interesting for anybody out there who wants to face other people being a producer or co-producer or even producing your own stuff, for sure. So there's a lot of producing, and that word, you're gonna hear it a lot. But this is a high school band. The keyboards player in this band is, in 2009, a student of mine for piano and keyboards. They are, at the time, again, in 2009, in high school or early university, some of them. And this is just, normal high school band. They have a punk rock attitude, but the songs that they've devised have very different origins somehow. They come sometimes from the bass player, sometimes from the singer, sometimes from the keyboards player. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you, but they present to me some songs, and I decide to produce 4 because they talked me into joining them for a contest, which they won, by the way, with these 4-track EP. The issue with the band was, well, first and foremost, they're super, they're great people, super funny to hang out with, but the time we spent in the studio was more trying to get high school people to record something that was useful and usable. So a lot of takes, a lot of mistakes, a lot of going back to it, but genuine session making, that's for sure. So the other problem we had was not technical, was that, as I said, the songs were coming from different band members, and because of that, they had different tonalities, different tones, different colors. Some of them were looking more into the vintage rock era, classic rock. Some of them were straight punk rock. Some of them were more mainstream kind of rock, so indie rock kind of stuff. And because of this, the EP was probably a little bit under siege. Like, we didn't really know where to take this, and they didn't have enough songs to make the EP in any other way. So I think I picked 4, or in the end 5. There's a bonus track in the EP. And I made this weakness of theirs, into a strong point, into strength. I decided to take one of the common elements in the songs, which was their punk rock attitude, the fact that they were young and kind of, not prepared sometimes to play the cool ideas that they had, and we had to stitch some takes together and all that. The fact that they were a little bit irreverent, in a way. I don't know. Is that a word? Maybe it isn't. But they were a little bit the typical young punk rock people, a little bit disrespectful of the neighborhood, and all that jazz. So that weakness of the songs being so diverse, I made into a strong point, because I found that one of the actual common elements of these songs was this punk rock attitude, like the way they could play the songs, the way they would carry on with the tempo, with the drums, was obviously unchangeable. It was a constant because these people were always playing the same stuff. So their skill, their chops, whatever they would do with the tempo and the mood was always happening. And the songs kind of had a little bit of the punk rock everywhere, but they were pushing and pulling towards different areas of rock. So the main idea for me was to make a sort of a joke against the cliches of classic rock, of indie rock, of mainstream top 40 rock, and make an EP where you could actually travel a little bit in time and get these young people to revisit some of the cliches of classic rock by making very authentic kind of sounds sometimes for the era or for the niche of the sound that they were aiming for, but keeping that main punk rock element. They won this contest because the identity of this EP and the band itself was so strong that actually the way they performed on stage almost didn't matter because they really believed in it. They really, were capable of diving into it. And that was a very cool experience. So let's take a look at the tracks, which I have here. They're loaded with stuff. And here, this song and what I'm gonna show you is not about the mix. We have some kind of mix, but we're not gonna talk about the mix in itself. This is more me as a producer trying to find a sound, a defining element in sound for this song within the context of the band that I just explained to you. And context is super important. That's why I've spent this introduction to tell you about who these people are and where I wanted to go with the record, because without these elements, you're just not gonna enjoy the choices that I've made in this actual song. So this was song maybe number 2 or something. So the track 1 was more punk rock straight there, so you could get an idea of these people, and then you would start traveling into different areas of rock music. This one being the 70s sort of stuff. So a little bit of Pink Floyd, a little bit of Led Zeppelin, and that stuff. So I think we could go and listen to the single elements step by step, or I could even try and have you listen to the whole track without the plugins on. This might be insane to do, but it's doable. I'm just checking whether or not I have stuff laying around. I'm probably just gonna keep the mix bus, and it's probably not gonna make much sense, but you might have some kind of idea of how this works. I really have no idea whether or not this is gonna work. So we're gonna try and do it, and if it doesn't, we're just gonna probably use plugins all over the place and listen to what I've done. Let's try and disable it globally. And let's try and go here. It should be bar 5 or something like that, maybe. Approximately here. Could be there. Yeah, let's start with bar 1, safer. All right. All right, and that's the end of the song. So I wanted you to listen to everything, and I want to make sure that I, start with the right foot. So obviously, the volumes that I've set are kind of there in the sense of, the priorities that I wanted to give it. So there's already some sort of decision. We can't really go back to having, I don't know, something in mono and just say this is as raw as it gets. I mean, if you had listened to this band live, which is the way you would, get an idea of how these people play and record, you would probably get some kind of vibe from the rehearsal room, for example. So here, the fun thing, which is going to add to the factor, is that we have all DIs, except for a couple tracks which are DIs into a pedal, with the red-orange ones. The actual guitars and bass are all DIs, and that's because when we produced these, we did it entirely in the box and we used some amp simulation. So taking the tracks back from 2009, I ditched the amplification and now I'm left with pure DIs, which are still great. They're still perfect to get an idea of the riffs, of what's a solo and how it has to get associated. So once you track and you have the band near, you can just take a look at what is the guitarist doing and the second guitarist and the keyboards player and stuff. Now here, I didn't have the band with me anymore, so it is always super important that you find out who is who and where they're gonna be sort of on stage for this. So I've kept the mix bus for you just to get things to be a little bit groovy. We're not gonna, take that into consideration of the raw and stuff. This will a little bit be like it was my console or something. And I'm gonna make sure that I turn everything back on. I'm probably gonna undo my life here. Let's see if it works. Because why not? It should work, right? Maybe the bypasses are not working. Okay, so I'm gonna turn these a little bit on, and then we're gonna select all of the tracks here, and we're gonna engage. Because all of the plugins I had, I made sure that they are, something I used. So I'm just gonna brainstorm stuff around, and I'm probably gonna start from the levels. I already talked about that, like you make sure things are disposed of the way you wanna dispose them with, and you just get an idea of where the song wants to go. So there's obviously a strong 70s element, and I would say early 80s or whatever. But I wanted to make this blatant in a way. And I love the chorus. So my decision was, you remember, the EP has to have this punk rock attitude. And I think the chorus allowed me to make that statement that the band was still young and sort of like disrespectful of the neighborhood. There has to be one of those times all the time in each of their songs to make sure that there's a sound, there's a sort of like a footprint, there's a story behind it. But I also wanted to make this specific song lean into the 70s rock. And this will be the mood and the way I'm going to show you how I processed stuff. Now, because this song leans to that, or like sort of is eyeing the 70s rock, and the song number 3, for example, is more of a top 40 song, we allowed ourselves to change genre a little bit and use, as I said, the different songs coming from different band members with different tastes actually as a strength rather than a weakness. But I had to make sure that sometimes, somehow, and especially in the choruses or in some specific important points, the punk rock attitude as a common denominator would happen, would be felt by the people, because that is the link between all of the songs. So this, again, is sort of like my mindset, and it's a video about producing, so there's gonna be a lot of these mindset elements involved. I would start from the drums for no reason, without probably avoiding anything in the plugins or in the process or whatever I did. But when I work to this kind of stuff, I want to have a powerful computer, a lot of tools, ready at hand, and nobody that bothers me, and something reliable and stable for which I'm going to save actually. And the reason being, you don't want to be interrupted, you want to have all of your tools at your disposal, and you don't want things to crash, and you are not probably gonna go drums, bass, guitars, keyboards, vocals, mix bus, This is not a mix, this is a palette of sound that happens almost as a cloud. So I'm going to show you drums, bass, guitars, keyboards, vocals, backing vocals, and then maybe mix bus. But this didn't happen that way. It was a call and response. So hearing something, making sure that stuff was working, and probably going from the guitars to the bass to the drums. These I can't really show you by talking about it, because I'm gonna break it in a way that it is understandable to you. But it is super important, again, that you understand that I am stopping time and I'm looking at something without the fourth dimension of time. So it's like looking at slices of an apple rather than looking at an apple. It is still important, though, that we take a look at the slices, because your brain is going to understand how I wanted to do stuff, and it's the best we could do. So I think the first thing I did was, when I listened to the drums, I said, I like how these drums are set. Let me solo them so you can hear them in the verse. I kind of liked how this was, but I thought that we could take a little bit of an 80s rock vibe and blend it into a more unmixed but raw and consistent drum kit. So I went into a little bit of sound design with the libraries that I have, and I managed to add the green tracks that you see on top to my brown tracks. So I made the volumes. I liked where the kick was, where the snare bottom, on top where the hi-hat, rock toms, a little bit of overheads and room. Just take a look at the fact that I kept everything a little bit narrow, maybe. Then you go on a super overt kind of old school rock, but I wanted things to be incredibly direct. I didn't want it to be a lot ambiency, because I wanted to have guitars with a lot of delays and reverbs and stuff. So I wanted drums to be more of a simplicistic approach, I would say. So the drums became something with the green part added, these samples, and these samples alone sound like this. Right? When I first got the samples that I liked, the actual kick and snare would sound like this. And within the context of the kit, when I listen to these samples with the drums, the original brown tracks, they sounded fine. But when I brought in the guitars, which I'm not gonna do now, just not to bother you with too much information already, I found out that the snare sounded too high-tuned for the actual song. So what I did is I called one of the oldest plugins I have, the Sound Shifter, and I just went one semitone down. So the snare sounded from this to this. It's just half a step down. The other thing I didn't like was that the kick was really nice, but towards the end of my production ideas, it felt very hi-fi with a lot of subs. Right? And this is a little bit too much for me. So I scooped this by taking a chunk from 80 hertz down, and I wanted it a little bit more, not lo-fi, but in the 70s you didn't have this amazing subwoofer stuff that you have now, right? So from this to this. It feels tighter, in a way, it is tighter, but if you bring everything together, it doesn't have that oomph, that very heavy lows that the mix bus is going actually then to also emphasize, which was a little bit too hi-fi and too high quality for me. And it kind of sounded a little bit out of context for what I wanted to do. So, funny enough, this is 99% the drum kit in the mix that I have. Like, there's nothing else. There's no plugins whatsoever except for those two that I showed you. Then the hi-hat in the headphones, which is something where when I produce I use a lot. Go back and forth headphones to speakers because I want to concentrate on how the experience is in terms of also like kind of a headphone experience when you're, in a metro line or whatever, and you're just spacing out with headphones. I want it to work there as well in terms not of mixing, again, but of sound design and production. The hi-hat was a little bit kind of dry. So I completely disabled the one with the samples that was incredibly thin. I'm not gonna even show it to you. But what I did is I brought in some reverb from a Rev 7, a Yamaha in Altiverb that is awesome for this kind of stuff. So the hi-hat alone sounded like this. And now it sounds like this. It's a little bit softer, it's a little bit milder, it is also a little bit more vintage, and it kind of blends in with the kit and it kind of disappears and gets watered down, but it does help. In a way, it becomes a little bit milder, especially on headphones. Notice where the hi-hat is. Nothing happens by chance. It is perfectly centered. I didn't want it anywhere else. I only reinforced the rack toms and floor toms. There's 2 rack toms on one floor with other samples, but that's pretty much that. There's also an ambience for the snare that I did, which I think is worth mentioning because it's kind of a weird track, but it works to create that vibe in the snare. It's this one. It's just ambience cut and merged from toms and snare. There's just nothing else. So it sounds super weird by itself, but it allows the mix to be a little bit more vibey and groovy, and each snare hit now has a little bit more of a halo around. Funny enough, this is what the drums do. On the drums bus, there is nothing. This is as simple as it goes. It's a very concentrated, focused drum kit in the center that is never giving up, and it's a very simple kind of snare line and drum kick and snare line that I absolutely loved. Like, this is, as a producer, I thought this is incredibly great. And I'm gonna move to the bass. The bass came to me, again, because of the export, through a bass DI and the fake bass amp. It was just a duplicate of the DI with no plugin on top. So the DI itself sounds like this. And this is incredibly clicky everywhere because it was just patched fast through Pro Tools. So there's a lot of cuts where you can hear clicks. You think we just heard one. And it just doesn't work. It's a DI, and what could I do? So the idea is you have a DI, you can make an amp track and blend them together. Well, I'm not gonna do that because this is the 70s kind of stuff, and I quite don't want or need the precision and the dry, nice lows of a DI. I'm just gonna go for a bass amp and find out what I can do with it, and I devised some sort of setup that turned it from this into this. And it has a lot more lows, has a little bit of saturation, a little bit of a hum from the transformer. It is incredibly nicer together. So when did I do the final choices for the amp? I didn't do them out of context. I didn't do them after the drums. I actually did most of the drums maybe alone which then I fine-tuned with the reverb and sample, and the bass I kind of worked out once I had the guitar's sound, because the bass was just out of context when you're gonna hear the guitars and what I did to them. So it's a simple setup. You might use presets in AmpSim if you want. It's just something that obviously is reminiscent of what you're gonna do in a 70s kind of rock, like Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin. You go look for which kind of amps and pedals they had and which kind of routing they had, and you kind of make it there. And I really love this sound, which again happened in contrast between drums and guitars. I think personally, guitars are what really defined these song and the crossover between 70s and punk rock. So I only had DIs, right? Only had DIs. So things can go everywhere. It's just about having a sound in your head for taking it somewhere. So to do this, I had to do a lot of experimentation, and I think I did it in a couple sessions. So maybe total of what, maybe 2 hours, like, 2 sittings, just doing fast. But I could do it in a relatively fast time because I brought all of my tools and even demos that I have. There's still some demos of stuff. I don't own all that, but there's a lot of freebies, a lot of free stuff, and a lot of demos that are maybe still working or expired, whatever. But the ones I've used, I made sure they're still working. A lot of people make amazing free VSTs that you can use for guitar amps or pedals and stuff, but the important thing is I brought them all into these 3 tracks here. You see them like pedals, effects, amp cabs. So amps and cabs. So these 3 tracks are just placeholders. They have nothing. They only hold the number of plugins that I want to have at my disposal to just drag and use without even using names or like typing, because I'm gonna forget that I have a TSC R47 or a Rodent V2 or a Prophet, whatever. It's just names that I can't always remember. But if I see them, I'm gonna go like, oh, right, I had this pedal, maybe it's gonna work. So let's take, for example, I would say the first 2 verse guitars. I'm not gonna talk about the intro guitar first because it's a little bit more complicated. So I didn't do that first. The first thing I wanted to do was verse leading into chorus. I wanted to establish a vintage tone for the verse and a punk rock still vintage somehow tone for the chorus. This was super important. And this was, as I said, the pivot point of the whole mix, right? Of the whole production value. So guitar number 1, G1, I placed at left 26, so I didn't want to have 2 moved around, and it sounded like this by itself. That's the DI. Right? We heard that when we played it. So I remember that we did everything with maybe a TL Ivory something as a DI thing that I used to track everything. So the first move I did was to reinforce the sort of vibe of the actual DI, just so I could feed a better DI into my virtual amps. So what I liked to use was Black by Acoustica with the pink Jasmine 08, whatever, that I cranked a little bit. And afterwards, I used an Ultramarine. And we are gonna see this in a lot more tracks because this is my sort of starting point to get the DI to be beefier and also compressed. I like 5 or 6 in Ultramarine, which is like a 670 kind of thing. So let's hear this with Black and then with Black and Ultramarine. Right? So it becomes incredibly clicky, pointy, and the question is like, how do you know that this is what you wanted to do? I set these up so that I had it ready before getting into my amps. So I could tweak this while the amp was going, as you know, if you were in a studio with the gear set up. So you got to have that experience, and then you carry it over actual digital stuff. So Pink Jasmine 08 should be an API preamp. I don't know. It sounded good to me, so I kept that, cranked it up a little bit, and then used Ultramarine. The actual amplifier that I wanted to use, because this is a DI, we gotta decide what kind of amp we wanna use. I know for sure that the Softube package of Vintage Amp Room has 3 super cool amplifiers that are perfect for vintage rock. It's called Vintage Amp Room. So I have a real Vox AC30 behind me, and this is really cool. It's got a normal and brilliant, whatever, a tremolo if you want it, and the tone stuff. You can move your microphone. There's not a million choices. So I picked this and I designed the sound going into it. So I propose we listen to this on the amplifier on without the actual black and ultramarine, just because this is how I set it up. I just dialed the tones that I liked in terms of brilliant and normal, and when the amp was in the ballpark, I started moving into the preamp and the compressor. And this was like my tone stack, sort of, you know? So with the amplifier, it sounds like this. Right? But now I moved into black. Just as if it was a real amp, I'm using more gain, I'm getting it hotter than before. Obviously, I have a more saturated sound and it just sounds cooler. I think this combination kind of sounds very realistic in a way, as, you know, having something a bit overdriven into the amp. But then with the compressor, you hear that it doesn't go all out anymore. And this is just perfect. This is exactly the sound I wanted, because I was listening to this with the drums, with the bass, and just like I imagined this. It just lacked something else. So this is what became of this guitar in the context of bass and drums. Now, the other guitar was treated pretty much the same way. So it had black and ultramarine going into archetype Pellini. Now, this is from Neural DSP, and people, this thing is insane. Like, these people are on the verge of breaking into next gen. I think they already did. They already stepped into next gen guitar amplification simulations. So it sounds great. It's their clean model. I think I'm using some amps. Yeah, I'm using compressor and overdrive, but I'm also using black and ultramarine before. Pink, same preamp model, maybe different compression factor. We're not here to talk about the mix, remember, we're here to talk about the principle of it. I wanted to use a Fairchild oriented simulation because this would be what in the 70s you might have, some sort of heavy tube transformer based preamp to kind of beef up the sound before getting into the amp. So with the amps on without special effects, the second guitar actually first, the second guitar sounds like this. There's also a reverb pedal that I used in this plugin, and it sounds just fantastic. I tried some delay, some stuff. There's a little bit of EQ, so I've taken, choices already. I didn't go for clean and all dry and decide afterwards if this would sound or whatever. I had everything in digital, people. This is so easy. Like, it isn't, but you're here, you have everything at your disposal. You can tell if these two guitars work with the drums and bass. there's a very long tail. I absolutely love these contrast between the snare that is so simple and so effective with this mood of the guitars, right? There's only a couple things I wanted to do. Guitar number 2 could be a little bit lighter, and to me that kind of light, a little bit of a less heavy, feeling comes from tape also. So I know how to use analog channel 202 for this stuff. So I turned the first guitar before and after. Let's do it without tape and then with. You hear it, right? It's incredibly lighter in a way. It's not brighter, but it has that scoop around middle frequencies and it just becomes more usable. And this was incredibly important. It happened because, as you heard, with bass and drums, it was a little bit too heavy. The other thing was, on the first guitar, I dialed in a preset that I love about Altiverb. It's the Super Reverb Amp impulse response. So you actually have the reverb from the Fender, but you also get this vibe of the amp itself and how, the actual reverb works. So let's do it before and after. It's so good, and I dialed it so short and took decisions with treble, bass, attack, very important on this kind of stuff on Altiverb. I just know the interface so well that it was like bloop, 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 done. So now drums, bass, and guitars, these two, make the verse sound like this. Very long tail again, and I like this. But the issue now was, do I want to do keyboards? Do I want to do vocals? Or do I want to do other guitars? So I think the priorities, the way I've set them was, I set up some of the mix bus to get some vibe, but I wanted to go twofold. I wanted to check the guitars and how the chorus guitars would blend in, but I also wanted to bring in the vocals first. I know there's keyboards. I know I'm a keyboards player, pianist, and my student was the keyboards player in this band, but I can't really dive into keyboards now before vocals. It is much more important, and that's what I did. I went here to the lead vocals, and I took a listen at, is the vocal singing here? Because there's a lot of instrumental and this part actually doesn't have it, but after some lines, the lead vocal comes in. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how the take sounds like.
Pray for your master. Scream. Scream in a blaster.
Right? And then it does this.
You must explain how you can see down under the rain without word in your head. You'll never had a clock to count the time that it has slipped on your skin.
Take these multi-platinum Grammy, people. So anyway, what I wanted to say is there's kind of a lot to do, but you can't really fight what you have. And actually, do you need to? I thought you don't need to. If I build this through different stages, I might be able to build something convincing. So the first thing I did was I took some pedals that I have here and impromptu, I just improvised some cool effects through filters, reverb, distortion, saturation, and that stuff. And I got an LDV processed track that sounds like this. Right? So this track I printed because it had so many things. I said, all right, this is, on the fly. We're going to do that. The idea was I kind of like to have vocals behind in this part and then come back to the front on the chorus when the vocals are shouting. So very 70s, and then remember who we are. We're not from the 70s. We're people imitating this stuff disrespectfully, blah, 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 all that. So the lead vocals in these effect process stuff kind of have something that is similar to what the actual lead vocals have, which are then blended in. So the first thing I did was using a Waves tune just to to make sure this was tuned, but I could have gone very natural, pretending this was actually sung, you know, for really in tune, but no. I wanted to be disrespectful to the 70s by going full speed auto tune and turned it into this.
Pray for your master. Scream in a blaster.
It's super static. I only went 78% correction. I could have gone even more. Let's hear the other part.
You must explain how you can see down under the rain without a word in your head. You'll never had a clock to count the time that it has.
Perfect. Actually, you can't quite spot the horrible way auto-tune works in these settings. You know, it's not auto-tune, but it's kind of similar until it gets to actually the fourth, almost the fourth phrase before the chorus kicks in. So I was really lucky that the horrible effect comes at a specific moment where he's already set the mood. And I was like, this is perfect. I'm gonna keep this. I used some de-esser afterwards. We're gonna take a look at this de-esser that saved my life a couple of days ago. But this was just to make things a little less bright. I don't think it is that important because the next thing I used my faithful mic mod and I turned this generic diaphragm condenser into a Telefunken Tele U47 and I also cranked the tube saturation. So let's do a before and after for this.
You must explain how you can see down under the rain without a word in your head.
It just sounds fuller and kind of nicer. And then I went to one of the coolest plugins that a lot of people don't know, and I actually found out that I had this, I don't know, maybe a week ago, the Audified U73B. This is a very old preamplifier. This is perfect for what we want to do. So let's do it even here, before and after.
You must explain how you can see down under the rain without a word in your head.
All right, it's getting to, this is expensive. This is something that's going through a lot of iron, a lot of, you know, whatever. And, you know, and it's kind of cool. Then I compressed this through a more modern kind of 1176 method. Again, before and after.
You must explain how you can see down under the rain without a word in your head. You'll never had a...
This is just getting the vocal to be a little bit more aggressive, and it's super important because we're not in the 70s. I want to lead into the chorus with, you know, some sort of vibe. Then I dialed in my faithful Satson CS with my preset I called Alberto's Startup. So this is my way of starting up this channel. It has two before and after with two faders and EQ going into a compressor. And almost instantly, I kind of had a very nice sound. So let's do again a before and after. I hope I don't touch anything here. All right, so.
You must explain how you can see down under the rain without a word in your head. You'll never have...
You see where I'm going, right? The vocals are starting to lose detail. Things are not as expensive as they used to be before. They're actually being filtered in a way that is emphasizing sort of like 2.4 and whatever. But I'm not thinking about mixing, thinking about sound, where I want these vocals to be. And now from here on, there's, you know, all bets are off. I actually dialed in one of my favorite plugins. This is from Audiority and it's called Ecos T T7E Mark II actually. So amazing. This plugin also saved my back when we had a real Ecos T7E that broke in a record, and the plugin kind of came out that same day. Maybe it's a conspiracy thing, and I got it like right off the bat. And it turns the vocals into this.
You must explain how you can see down under the rain without wetting your head.
Very long tail, very nice, atmospheric and stuff. And then, while listening to the mix, I also wanted to add some distortion. So I had type used maybe 2 days before, and I crunched everything into this.
You must explain how you can see down under the rain without wetting your head.
Right? Super long tail, very distorted. These happen a little bit more in contrast with house stuff. But because of the distortion that I had, I went back into 21st century and used Smooth Operator and just cleaned some of the frequencies here.
You must explain how you can see down under the rain without wetting your head. You never had a clock to count it tight.
And I think the way Smooth Operator did this cleaning is insane. This is like a great showcase because it just makes the vocal be so much more focused in the center that is just fantastic. So from here on, I kind of wanted something else, and I dialed in a plugin that I know very well because I spent a lot of time, tinkering with it. There's some presets of mine here, and I use one of my presets called New Shanghai Flyby. It's actually used in some soundtrack that I wrote. What is it now? Maybe almost a year ago. No, it's around 6 months. It looks like forever. So I dialed in some of these settings and wanted even more reverb and atmosphere. So before and after.
You must explain how you can see down under the rain without wetting your head.
Can you hear it? I mean, it's going on indefinitely. And this is maybe even too long, a little bit too long. What is it? It's just probably the feedback of whatever is happening that I cut it for you, but this is still going. Beautiful. So, because of this, the sound kind of builds into itself and it gets ducked when he's singing and then it comes back up. So, lead vocals with special effects, the guitars we had, and bass and drums. I kind of wanted to make sure that I was vibing enough to get some sort of message across. So here it is. Now, let's not forget I had cranked everything up. You hear the vibe. I didn't have the volumes before, so I didn't want to stop because, the volumes kind of happen. It's more of a clashing of sounds. Do they work or not? So I had brought it at +10 just because the signal was very low before when we had no plugins. And now let's bring it back and contextualize because the mix bus, obviously, it's going to offset things. So hear it again. Very long tail. And I like how things fit into each other. I like some of the transformer sound or tape sounds or hum noise from these plugins that emulate vintage. I didn't want to carb that. I found it incredibly interesting and useful. So this was working. I really liked it. I now didn't fear that the vocals could have no room for expressing itself, because it's super important. The guitars that are playing here are all we have. It's these two. I didn't place them at 100% left and right. I just wanted them very focused. And this was my main sound. What I went to do afterwards was to check what the guitars alone would do in the chorus. The transition actually was more important to me than bringing the keyboards in, because I knew I could take some colors and make the keyboards work, but I wasn't sure that the transition to the chorus would work. There's also no cymbal hits. It's a very weird sort of mechanic change, but you know, I had to make sure it worked and find sort of the solution for it. So the first thing I wanted to do is check what kind of guitars are there, because I know the drums and bass are gonna keep playing, but how about the guitars? So we go from these two that we heard. We go from, these two into these other two. Right? So how did I get there? Because this was actually what we had before. Right? I mean, there's literally nothing. So the first thing I wanted to do is think about, you have two guitarists. Think about this fact. You have two guitarists and they're always the same people and they have rig on stage and you don't have an endless palette of sounds. So I wanted to respect this in two ways. First, obviously, volume and pan. I didn't want to make drastic changes, so I started from the very first point. Guitarist 1 is left 26. It's going to stay left 26. And guitarist 2 is right 50. It's going to stay right 50, at least as a starting point, which then turns out, you know, worked. What I wanted to do from guitar 3 was, you have a guitarist and you're stepping into the chorus. Why would you want to go and take a look at all of the plugins you have when the solution is in front of you every time you play or watch with somebody or watch a gig or be at a concert? The guitarist is there. Their guitar is the same. They probably are going to push some pedal and lead into the chorus. So why could be changing the amps or whatever, the preamp stage or the tone stack be a solution for your song? It's never, to me, gonna translate into something organic. So you have to think within the context of what you liked for the verse. And I think this is super important because it has to happen in the chorus as well. So once you find a sound in the verse that works, it's gotta work for the chorus as well. And if you make very drastic changes to make the chorus work, you might wanna go back and think about what kind of settings the guitarist would have for the verse. But the two things are incredibly interconnected, and if you have a bridge, it's even more complicated, but it's simple because that person has a pedal board that's probably gonna be all that matters to lead into that. So I think I pretty much kept these first settings the same, like black and ultramarine are sort of identical, I would say, but you know how it works, right? I use them as a preamp stage. The thing that changed was that the first amplifier and the second amplifier are not set identically. They actually have a little bit less brilliant for the chorus and a little bit more normal and a little bit halfway tone, 12 o'clock with tone rather than all the way clockwise. So these turns, these two guitars without effects and stuff going on, from this to this. Let's hear chorus, a verse into chorus for guitar 1. Super important that it just works. As simple as that. The volume change is the only thing I am tolerating for the actual sort of drastic change. I'm tolerating that because there's a mix bus involved, there's gonna be different vocals involved. So this volume setting that I've dialed in is operational for the mix that I'm having right now. Obviously in solo we hear that, but you hear how it kind of is just a matter of volume now. And if I were to just compensate the second guitar, the chorus guitar, it would just happen. Now let's hear the same thing for guitar 2, which leads into guitar 4 actually, right? G2 becomes G4. And G4 by itself sounds like this. Now here is where I had to play a little bit of an unfair game to get to a sound that I liked, because I think that the guitar player went a little bit too overboard with using that pedal. It was a matter of like how they liked the sound, and I was like, wow, this is already taking such a strong decision that it's probably not gonna work that well. So let's compare where we're going from guitar 2 verse to guitar 4, which is the red one, guitar 4 chorus. I said like, this is actually not that bad, So, I tricked you into it. It's actually more of a technical thing, but it doesn't feel that bad. It all actually sounds like the guy has stomped on the pedal, and here comes the punk. I said like, hold on, this is the element I want to use to bring back the punk rock attitude of these people. So it is fine. I just have to build it somehow. So what I did was I dialed in no black and ultramarine because it was already such a saturated signal that I didn't want to do that, but I brought in another Plini that sounded like this. Right? So this effect kind of has this gentle vibe to the actual super distortion. It makes it even a little bit nicer somehow. Did I do pedals at the beginning? No, obviously, because I just wanted to check. Maybe sometimes you do, but it was such a distorted sound from the get-go that it didn't work. So what I did was, okay, I like the sound. I brought in some analog channel just to make it a little bit lighter. It sounds like this now. This is a preset that I have. It's called whatever, guitar lightener, or I don't know. It's just something I drop in when I want guitars to be strong, but I also want that record effect for the record to be, I want you to be able to see across the wall of guitars and see behind to all the reverbs and things. So this preset kind of always works. The main issue I had was that this tone was really somehow clashing in terms of how technically recorded it was. So let's hear both of the guitars coming from the verse into the chorus alone in solo, and then we're gonna do with bass and drums. I said, all right, that could work, but how about with drums and bass? Okay. I said, well, that's not too bad, but I wish I had a way to remove some of that oily, crispy, and glass and oil mixed together that the high air of the pedal has. I didn't really like it. I don't know if it was my preamp or whatever. And what really saved me was TD-SR Pro, which had already saved me 2 days before for a real gig in female vocals. So for some video game voiceovers and prompts and stuff that an algorithmic system was actually calculating. So it was a super complicated thing. I got, almost before going to sleep or whatever, an emergency call, we had to do it. So I knew that this could do it. And The insane thing that I did here was that, let me just double check, yes, okay, this one is set in a way that is operating between 2.2 kilohertz and 11.5. And let's hear this guitar by itself without this de-esser and then with. It's just capable of doing some sort of weird interaction that I would even say by itself might sound a nonsense, but together with the two guitars, let's try it without and with the other guitar. I think it had already set my system to be prioritizing guitar to left guitar, so the first guitarist, because it's a higher sort of like Vox oriented kind of riff, which I wanted, but I was having the support of everything. I just needed a couple things, but now the tone was kind of ready. I dialed in some EQ to fine tune the sound and then some filters afterwards to make it ultimately vintage. So I'm gonna play for before and after with the first EQ and with both EQ engaged. We're going to whatever we heard, guitar 2, chorus, everything, and then I'm gonna add these two layers one by one. Now it's incredibly garage in a way, and it's much more sacrificed. There's a lot less detail, but with just the other guitar and bass, listen to this transition. And now drums. And it worked. And the only thing that I really liked, so there's guitar 1 in the chorus that's playing that vintage, 50% vintage, 50% kind of indie rock thing, garage stuff, band playing on a cheaper stage. And the other part, the second guitar is playing the punk attitude of it, and that is super important. So it gets lo-fi, boxy, and I almost like as if the amplifier was broken somehow. That's exactly how I pictured it. Like it's a broken amp, the band is broke, nobody cares, it was played too loud, and it blew up. The only thing I really, really loved to get, and now I'm getting into the more soundstage thing, was that I am not putting guitars left and right 100%. I didn't want that experience. I want something a little bit more into the deep rather than into the wide. So to refill the space that is missing here, I went for an RE201 emulation because that's how you do it. So I have no other term for it. I set it up in a way that it suited my vibe with the Reverb 8. I really love that kind of setting and stuff. And I dialed it in some of the guitars, namely the intro, which we haven't listened to yet, but the guitar 1 for the chorus has that. So once you get into the chorus, you break into this more stereophonic thing because the chorus wasn't exploding as much. And I'm gonna let you hear this guitar without the reverb send and with. And with. You hear what it does, right? It fills the left and right extreme sides of my stereo field, especially on headphones, and makes it just turns it into not having the need anymore to move guitars to the right. And I think this, if you study like vintage rock and all that stuff, is one of the key elements of some of the vintage rock stuff, because they didn't do a lot of LCR, very heavy stuff like stoner rock does in the 90s, end of the 90s, 2000, whatever. It's more about filling it with effects, and there's only a couple units that are capable of doing this, and the RE201 is just insanely good because it's a mixture of delay and reverb, so it's fantastic. If you tune it up, you can save your preset. This one doesn't even break. It's great. And all of a sudden, the extreme areas are filled with vintage air and the guitars are resonating, but we're keeping the core elements of the band together. It's a small stage, people. This is vintage rock, so but it's also punk rock band. So because it's old and it's cheap and it's garage, people are compressed in a way. They are closer together. The amps are close together. You're not at Wembley Stadium, right? So this was super, super important to me. And once I got this, I really loved how the soundstage was developing. And I said, okay, I have the drums, I have the bass. What I want to check out is just chorus 2. And I went to check chorus 2 only to find out that the other guitar 2, so you see this red one called, again, G4, but it would be G4B. Let's call it G4B rather than G4 only. And G4B sounded different somehow. And I used the same settings, you see, and I didn't just divert from my path. I used the same amp, the same tape emulation, the same filters, but I had an issue with how maybe the pedal was set or something. It just wouldn't work the same way. Listen to the second guitar in the chorus without the de-esser, just with the amps and effects, in comparison to the one in chorus 1. Oh, well, now they sound the same, but they change halfway through. I remember that. You hear that harmonic, right? It is spiking up somewhere around the half of the first chorus, and it's actually not there, but it's way outside. So I think the pedal was set differently, and it didn't work for me. So the only way I could set this to work in the context of things was to use the same de-esser, but make it listen to the difference. So I'm actually doing something you would never do. I am monitoring the difference it creates, and it's just scooping 2.2 into 11.5 kilohertz. And it's still de-essing, but I'm listening to what's different between the original and the processed version. So let's do it without and with, because this is insanely cool. So by feeding Plini the same settings with the different version, it becomes so good, so good. And with the other guitar, which is still G3, it carries over from chorus 1 to 2. It's just awesome. I really love this, and it's one of the first times I'm using a de-esser in difference mode to actually feed a guitar amp. It was just great. So the other thing we're missing is the other colors in the guitars, namely G6. G6 I went for black and ultramarine again, and then I went into Plini because now we are thinking, okay, who's playing third guitar? This is the track I had without anything. Right? It had a little bit of a roll-on, but let's take it off, you know, just because it wasn't there initially. I just dragged it in when I needed a bit more space. So we're breaking out from chorus here. right? And what happened was, what do I use? Do I go back to the vintage Fender? I could have done that for sure, but I really liked the clean tone of this unit rather than the tone of the soft tube amp, because it was just getting into more of a lead tone for a Vox amp, and I didn't want to have that. So this time I went for one classic configuration because it's like a solo, but it's not a solo. It's carrying the song, but there's no lead. So it's actually what's most important in that part. I wanted the listener to concentrate on that. So I needed some bottom, but I also needed the attention to the high frequencies. So I went for two microphones, 57 and 160. Why did I do that? Because I own a 57 and a 160, and I've used them in cabinets in 1x12 or 2x12, and it works. So I tried and moved stuff around, went for edge of the cone a little bit, and it sounded great. I only had to lighten it up a little bit, so you know what I do there. Tape again, one of my presets, and then the filters, because as you hear, this was a little bit too heavy. So let's hear it without and with this very gentle filter. We don't want all of those lows. And we have some delay. Here the difference in these plugins is also that I dialed in, we actually don't. Why is that? I thought we had somewhere in here that sounded very reverby. Is it maybe coming from something else? No, it's impossible. Compressor overdrive, all right. Well, it's probably the pre-delay and the short reverb in the pedal that's generating that, but I like it, not changing it, it's fine. I wanted some more atmosphere. So here is it without the RE201 and with. So let's try it again by itself without the additional send as you got it now. This is my space maker, my sound stage maker, right? So let's try without and with. Hear how deep it is, but also wide. It's just great. I moved this to 37. So to me, this in my mind, despite the fact that I've used actually a different amp that Guitarist 1 has always used, sounds like Guitarist 1, the first guitarist. So the one who started with the vintage Vox now is moving into the clean tone, but it still sounds like a cleaner Vox IC30. To me, you could get there somehow, so it doesn't really interfere. The only thing it does, it moves slightly to 37 left rather than 26, as if the guitarist was a little bit moving off stage to meet the crowd somehow, you know, something like that. Afterwards, this guitar is met by a different kind of solo guitar. So this plays a riff all the time and it sounds like this. Right? So what I did was, okay, I want to beef this up right off. And I used Plus Distortion, which is a free, I think it's a free, I had it here, yeah, it should be a free VST. Maybe they don't make it anymore, it's discontinued, but I got some friends that said like, you gotta try this is great. And this is how it sounds like without and with. I really loved it. All of these tricks not only give the sound some vibe and take, you know, decision in where I want to go, but they also make sure I don't have to fix clicks any longer, because things are getting mangled so strongly and so violently that we don't need that. Then I went into Plini again. However, here I used head number 2 because it's a more crunchy head, and this sounds like this now. So how would it sound without this pedal? and with. It's just great. This is the epitome of the mixture between the two genres that I was talking about. This dude is playing some more vintage rock groove in a very teenager way. Like it almost feels scared to make a mistake and very sort of like, kind of mechanically, but we're giving it the sound of a little bit more of a distorted punk rock stuff, of somebody who doesn't care about it. But the riff he's playing is actually from back in the days. So it's just great. So what I wanted to do to further improve the effect was use Gem Mod. This is an insane Dimension D plugin by Overloud, and it becomes this. Right? Instead of. Just has a dimension to it. I know it's a cheap joke, but it's true. Then echoes, because once again, I dialed it in, I tweaked the playback and reps well and whatever. I wanted a lot more vibe. This is a very vibey area, right? So here's how it sounds now. You hear how deep it is? Rather than really wide, it's drenched in the 70s too. I have no idea. It just sounds beautiful, and it takes some of the edge off the nearness to us. It still has it, but it's a little bit on the back, like we're not being hurt by the live session. But we hear that it's violent enough, but watery. No, a little bit in the back. All of the old records are never up front, right? They have that distance, that air. And then I also wanted to add more RE201. What I did, however, was I put these in pre-fader, so I could blend how much of the reverb I wanted, and it becomes this. You hear where it goes to the left. So things are moving differently now. What I also wanted was, I could play with a little bit of de-essing, a little bit, maybe, I don't know. Let me see how it went. It's a 1.7 to 1 ratio, so it's very gentle, but maybe it's working all the time, but it's only working between 5.5 and 9.5 kilohertz. There's a little bit of a low pass, and there's no saturation. So let's try without and with. I think it helps the clicks and it helps the more modern kind of stuff. It puts the sound a little bit behind. So now, ladies and gentlemen, the two guitars with drums and bass in this beautiful reprise before the actual verse 2. Hear how nice the tail is. So this is crucial. This part is insanely important for it. There's only one guitar that is here. There was another doubling guitar that I muted. So this is a producer decision. I was like, this is useless. I don't want to have it. The only thing I've done here to this guitar is printing it because it was exactly like Guitar 1, I think. The only thing I changed was I wanted some more RE201. So it sounds like this. And you hear it again, right? Because what's happening here is this is maybe the guitar that has the most RE201, so the most space echo available. And the reason for it is that it carries along with it basically disappears and reappears as always the first guitarist number one. So this guitar we heard, the red one, G1B, carries on, and G6 becomes, let's hear the transition between G6 becoming G7. Now, I dare you not admit that it sounds like the guitar player just stomped on an effect pedal and kicked in some overdrive, and that's just it. There's nothing else to it. And that's, again, it's like 35 pan, it's not 100% identical, but it works and it has more effect because we're leading into this other part that is the final chorus. So why am I concentrating this much on transitions? Because they're super important in terms of how the song's developing. This is a 70s kind of vibe. So there's a lot of things you don't do anymore. And in not doing them anymore, we kind of lost the vibe of how natural it was in the 70s to get something like this. And the songs, if you hear Led Zeppelin, they just go wherever they want. Pink Floyd even more maybe, and it just so happens that it's naturally going places. You try and do it now and you're like, oh, this sound doesn't work, or this pedal doesn't work, whatever. So it's crucial that people are gonna, I want them to play this song at least 100 times, because that's the title of the song. So let's hear the transition with just guitars, bass and drums from these middle eight into the final part of the middle eight that's gonna lead into the last chorus. The beautiful thing that happens, which I'm very proud of, and I would like you to, savor and take with you forever, is that G6 plays with G1B, right? And then G1B keeps playing and G7 takes the place of G6. So the guitarist number one changes the riff, but guitarist number two keeps playing the same stuff. Now, because guitarist number one goes from one tone that is more of a lead part into a more, dampened kind of rhythm section part, guitarist 2 is capable of playing the same riff and sounding different. It sounds as if the lead has been taken by guitarist 2 without doing anything. So it's like when you hear classical music and the melody moves to the bottom, right, instead of being at the top. So the choices of tone that guitarist number one makes are the essence of interplay, which the 70s and 80s were great for, and we strive to maintain these days because people don't know it anymore. It's the respectful getting away from the front of the stage of guitarist one that allows guitarist two to take the spotlight without doing anything. It's actually out of respect. This is it's moving, and I could cry out of this, but seriously, it's these peculiar, and people feel this stuff. They don't know it rationally, but they feel it, and it's just great. Guitarist 2 plays the exact same thing. It's guitarist number one that decides to lead him into becoming the spotlight, and it's a dialogue between two things, and they stay the same, but they actually just change. So from here on, let's hear how it goes with getting into the chorus. So we get the vibe back, we're back into punk rock mode, we're back into the closing part of the song, and we wanted to add, as a producer, I wanted to add one element here, which is a quote from, you could say, sort of like the ending of A Day in the Life or something like that. It's this strong crescendo in reverse for the guitar that sounds great, and it just wakes you back up. You're coming back to the ugly small neighborhood in which these people are playing all day long in their garage. It's just like the dream it's unfortunately over. Wake up. And you've been spending like a nice minute or so with lead guitar, playing these nice riffs and stuff. They also borrow some ideas, and there's a lot of musical quotes in here that are meant to be evocative of the genres that these people are not even ready to play because they're teenagers, but their punk rock vibe then takes, the lead. So everything was cool. We have the guitars down, they play right. For me, this was more important than actually getting the vocals down, because the vocals here play a lot of effect kind of type, unless we go to the chorus vocals, because chorus vocals are shouting, and these shouts, they need to be modern. So to do this, I actually treated them pretty much the same. Let's hear these two without effects. So they have treatment on their track, and they have treatment on the actual backing vocals bass. So I gotta turn off everything just so you can listen to it. So it's 2 + 2 sometimes. And these are girlfriends of the band. So, they're groupies, sort of.
You were born 100 times in the land of mystic lights.
Right? Okay, so let's put Waves tune, kind of a milder setup just to have them more coherent. Mic mod, but now I'm using an AKG C12, cause whatever, right? So how are they now?
You were born 100 times.
I'm bringing in a lot of proximity effect because these guys are like using a very expensive mic and like disrespectfully, right? Then I brought in the U73. Sounds like this.
You were born 100 times.
Lovely how silky it is now. It's protected in a way, and it's richer, and it's a little bit of honey in there. It's a little bit more stable. Analog channel 1, ladies and gentlemen, and 2 now. These are emulating sort of a tape machine being kind of not abused, but like regulating a little bit of the energy. So let's try it without and with.
You were born 100 times in the land of mystic lights.
Becomes lighter. It becomes lighter again. Then there's a FET compressor on both, meant to add the aggression factor for it. And after this, I actually loved to use an opto compressor, Tuco, in limiter, whatever, slow attack, yes. So let's try one after the other, everything with FET and then Tuco.
You were born 100 times in the land of mystic lights, where the glory mystifies anyone play tonight.
Right? I remember when I found this line and I said like, you gotta come here and sing this. So the only thing I did to the female backing vocals was a filter for both. So without
Play tonight.
and with. Now by themselves they sound much darker, but why I did this because there's a lot of stuff on the backing vocals that I actually did before I even treated the backings. So Tuco again.
Play tonight.
A lot of volume that is meant to feed a FET compressor. So now I'm really using the colors backwards. I did it backwards in the tracks and I didn't even realize, and I'm doing it backwards for like FET is after in the bass, but it's before in the single tracks. So without this FET and with.
Play tonight.
Sounds so good. Such a record. And then I remember I put my headphones on and I took one of the most iconic pieces you might have in a studio, in virtual or real, I don't know. And it's the H3000 band delays. I tuned everything here by hand, spent quite some time filtering stuff, and this is what happens to these backings.
Play tonight.
I really wanted this to be 100 times sort of the symbol of the vocals, because these band delays are creating 100 of feeding back stuff, right? So let's hear the beginning without and with.
You were born 100 times in the land of mystic lights, where to glory.
Right? It repeats 100 times. Now, again, some sort of tape. Let's try without and with.
You were born 100 times in the land of mystic lights.
And this becomes incredibly sharp. It wouldn't make sense to have it, right? I don't like it this way, but it fits into type again. So there's a lot of glue and difference. So let's hear type without and with.
You were born 100 times in the land of mystic lights.
So now we're getting these 100 times, delay, which means the song, it's sort of a reference to the song itself. And now I want to filter it. So again, before and after.
You were born 100 times in the land of mystic.
The band delays are so sharp that they get across even with the filters, and they're lighter than the actual voices are, as if they were ascending to some sort of like supernatural stage. The last touch was just the classic 224. Altiverb has these. I know the interface, I love it. I am not changing for, just experimenting. I know how it works. There's a lot of 224s out there, maybe in IRs, but this one's great. Let's try it without and with.
You were born 100 times in the land of mystic lights.
I wanted in the land of mystic lights. I wanted mystic lights in the sound of them. As a producer, I wanted them there, and it just sounds so good, because everything I've taken away from the actual tracks that I recorded is being regenerated in this digital recreation of the 224. So I don't know, it's just like, it's such a produced sound, yes, but it sounds so good to me. And when you heard a lot of the low thump, is because we're playing just the backing vocals by themselves. So the mix bus is just pumping it up. I want you to hear just drums and bass. It's something that I do. No guitars, just backing vocals with drums and bass. It's just great. What is missing in this spectrum of frequencies? The mid frequencies. And who is mid frequencies? It's guitars. So if we go the opposite way, we take no drums and we just take guitars now with the same backing vocals. How is this gonna sound? It's a trick that I usually play just to be fresh in the listening. You hear that the guitars alone and the vocals alone make the guitars jump up because of the mix bus. But when I bring in the transients from the drums, you know that the volume I've set for the guitars was actually in context, right? But it's just a matter of color. Remember, we're not mixing. We're getting a mix done because we're not mixing. That's the beautiful part of it. We're producing this band. So we're thinking about sounds and stuff. We're not aiming at being correct in any way. I don't care. Now, there's only one guitar that I really love, and it happens in the intro, but the last guitar also happens to be with a keyboard. So these keyboards are played through, I think, an M1. So the sounds are not from that era. So I had to do something about it. So let's go and listen to these hold. right? Very modern. So first thing I did, bring in Tuco. It's thicker, it's a little bit rebalanced and less sharp. Then I made it sound wider with the Dimension D. And it goes amazingly around. Then the Vintage Maker and Depth Generator Ecos T7E. This is so good. But then I wanted hyperspace. Let's try without and with, even more reverb tail. Very long tail. Isn't it great how together it sounds? It doesn't sound like there's 5 processors on it, just sounds great. I wanted to remodel some of the frequencies. These I did when listening in context with the guitar because it was masking the guitar line. So let's try it without and with, and then you'll hear what I'm talking about. So it is lower in volume, and I did everything just so that I can keep it at 0 and just, play there. The guitar was getting overwhelmed. The guitar I'm talking about is this. Let me bring back this stuff. So there's black, there's ultramarine, there's a TS999 pedal. So let's listen to this from the production here with the pedal. Right? Becomes a square wave almost, right? So it's just a little bit more interesting. It leads into this same Guitarist 1 amp. Notice the difference though. There's some settings that are a little bit different, but the distance of the mic, it's a lot farther. And this makes the guitar feel farther away. So without and with. Then I used some, again, super reverb. Just for the mojo. Depth generator, a lot of it. And hyperspace. So I accidentally wrote some automation here. You see what I'm doing, right? I'm moving the character around, and it creates this sort of air vibe somehow. And this is so long that it's gonna cover my voiceover when I talk, because this is insane. I even added an RE201 so I could get more stereo effect. this is us getting into the song, right? Now those first lines of guitar, I would love to have a bit more drenched in reverb. I mean, things could develop from there because it's kind of drier and then we get into it. Automation's not being done. I was just trying to follow the intro track. It's just great. There's also a couple more tracks of actual synths. So one is this pan flute that I did like this. It sounds completely dry like this. Right? So this is an M1 thing, I think. So let's see how I did the change. So filter bank, a lot less frequencies, Tuco compressor, bringing back some vibe and body, then tape, then filters, sorry, with a bit of a resonance here. And we're getting vintage and now echoes again. And then hyperspace, again, similar settings but different DAC and length. This is very short. Right? And then RE201. Now this happened with the vocals and everything else, so it's just a complementary sound. It doesn't have to be super featured and loud, so I wanted to check it with the vocals. We're gonna do it first, and then we're gonna listen to it with the whole band. So what is the element that kind of carries over anything that nobody would ever think that is that important? It's the snare and the little room that the hi-hat has. This thing is your anchor to the whole mix and nobody's ever gonna know. It's the first element we talked about and then we forgot about it. But it's the defining compass in your journey into this song. Whatever happens, the verse, the punk rock, chorus, the super psychedelic introduction with no drums, the solos, the second chorus, these drums are your, buoyance thing, it's just like it carries you as a reference into the darkness and the turmoil of this song. There's only one more keyboard, I think it's called Madness, and it plays here in the choruses. So what I did here, I don't even remember. I think this sounded, yeah, okay, well, so the actual dry sounds is this. Too modern, so compression, pedal like compression. BX5 reverb, beautiful unit. This is not even, I thought it was a longer effect. It was just like surprise for a second. It's just so short, but it's actually taking care of building a bit of a halo thing, which goes into the gem mod, so another dimension D. Let's hear it without and with. This is exactly where I want keyboards to be in this whole record and stuff, especially in this song. So now, echoes for more depth, without and with. And I can have some lows, some more than I would want, just because I have a very mid-oriented second guitar. I'm confident that if you listen to this song and remember this song, which is my purpose, and I would consider myself successful if this happens. You listen to this song a lot of times, maybe 100 times or so, and you talk about it with your friends, like you really have to check this out. And it goes like when the chorus comes, there's the guitars and shouting vocals, but actually the loudest element that really defines this vibe and kind of makes you move more than the guitars and everything is the drums, which is the loudest of all. But because it's so kind of narrow and put into the cone of the center area, and it's so simple and predictable compared to the other clashing sounds together and the shouts, you don't quite listen to it. You go past it. But it keeps your buoyance, as I called it, like your orientation within the whole song. And if you technically listen to it, it's got, wow, this song has a lot of drums in comparison. But if you listen just thinking about it, very low volume, the drums are gonna still be the defining factor, the sort of vibing thing. But when the chorus comes in, it drops and the drums kind of sink into it, and then they redefine your guidance in a way. I really like how sometimes they're not as defined in terms of cymbals, but the skins of the snare and kick are never, letting go. So I really, really like this. I think we covered everything. Keyboards was the last part. Lead vocals, we did it. Everything together. What about maybe the mix bus? Very briefly, it doesn't really matter to me because this is a defining point of like something you might want to change. The other elements I've talked about are much more important. But if we had to go through them, I'm gonna turn these off. We have a tuco. First thing, let's try the actual solo part, maybe. All right, the sort of interlude in between. So this is without tuco and then with. Right, there's a little bit of power getting delivered, but not that much. Then there's Royal Compressor. Let's hear it without and with. I'm almost using these as an sort of an amplification stage, so whatever, like in driving gain into it, not compressing. Maybe sometimes it just barely moves. Then there's a Millenia EQ, without and with. Really like this. Then there's a Pulsar Mu. So this is a limiter in Vari-Mu mode. So it's kind of more colored than a normal limiter, and it's not as strong as a limiter. This one's very subtle, like incredibly subtle. And then last but not least, actually one from the last, is our analog chorus, analog channel. So this is making the tape machine emulation. I'm gonna turn both of them on and off. So let's start with, without, and then with. Everything is so easy to enjoy this way. I don't know, it's just like the rationality of it has gone away somehow. I don't know. It's just like tape, probably what it does. I know how to use those two plugs a lot. I've been using them for years and years and years and years. So, that's there. Last but not least, one of my best presets ever in my life, ever made, that didn't make it into the plugin, the Alberto's Vintage Mix Leveler. Let's try these without and with. Now, in the last steps, I didn't even recheck my mix bus, so I think I'm like maybe a tad hotter than I would want to be. I don't know. And how do I know this? Because this last stage of compression should usually be around floating between 0.2 and 0.8, whatever. It's playing around the half a decibel thing. But I wouldn't change it. Doesn't really matter. It's presenting the whole thing in a much more expensive way without changing the vintage vibe somehow. I don't know. It's meant to be the last change of it. So what else can I say? We drove through 100 different elements, because the song is 100 times, so I gotta use that, that make this song what it is now. We started from completely dry DIs and we drove through a lot of my choices, production choices. If you thought you were watching, learning a mixing video, you gotta rethink that this is myself as a producer of a band, taking decisions about what I want to do. And you might say, well, you use plugins, you're using mix bus stuff, so this is mixing. And that is exactly the answer. And without me actually answering this, think about it. There's a lot of production value that we don't talk about when we analyze plugins and we talk about different elements and blah, blah, blah. But how about the band, the people that made it, the ideas, the story behind the EP and where this song is placed within the galaxy of the EP, where I want the band to go in terms of how people perceive it. Everything plays a role. The production value of this song and this EP is next to zero in terms of how expensive the mics were, how the preamps used were. I could do a tech sheet and we wouldn't probably, except for my Pro Tools HD, the hardware would never even go at around, the recording hardware would never even reach €1,000 probably. And it's how you use it. It's not how much it is, So it's super important that you see how all the clicks you might have wanted to work on, all the off-tempo stuff, we could still fix it. We could still work around it. Do I care that much? I wanted to show you this exact moment in time in which I have a song that I would give to somebody else. Now I would print maybe the stems and give it to somebody else to mix, or give the actual single tracks. And I would be confident that if we do that, unless it's someone I really trust and that has been with me and with the project itself from the get-go, it's gonna get ruined. If the band and me and everybody likes this, if the band and I like this, it's going to be different. And something's gonna break. Even if you fix a click, even if you do whatever you wanna do, it's gonna be not that vibey stuff. People don't go for the perfection. People go for the color, and the production phase is incredibly important. I think we're losing this, and I would like to reinstate it, because all of these technical plugins and digital audio and the way we conduct music production is kind of dangerous sometimes. It just sends the beauty of working with a band and having ideas in terms of sound away in favor of whatever thing is popular now, and it's no longer gonna be trendy in 2 weeks, maybe not even one, So, as usual, thank you very much for being with me. I hope this inspires you to go 100 times farther into music production the way, to me, it's supposed to be. Thank you again. Ciao.